Okay, well let's get started for the day. So welcome everybody, and Wendy, thanks for being willing to offer the prayer. And if you'd give that now, that'd be great.
All right. Our dear Father in heaven, we're thankful for another beautiful day. We're thankful for this opportunity to study the history of this world and thy hand in it. And please help us to learn and take in as much as we possibly can, to apply what we've learned, find ways to apply it to our lives and to make a difference. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for that. Okay, well let's dive right in. Let's see here. There it is. Okay. From the beginning. There we go. Okay. So, are you able to see the slideshow, John Milton, the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates?
Yes.
Okay, well, excellent. So that's what I'd like to talk about today. So hopefully you have your notes with answers to those questions that I asked, and then also hopefully you have that primary source in front of you. I have it as pages 7 and then 8, just that last paragraph in the readings for the Glorious Revolution. Do both of you have those with you?
Mm-hmm.
Great. You too, Walter?
Which ones?
Do you have the assignment that you were supposed to read for today, the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, the last paragraph?
Yes, I have it.
Okay, great. We'll be discussing it.
Okay.
Well, excellent. Well, I'm sorry. Did you have a question? No.
Nope.
Okay. Well, excellent. Well, then let's jump right in. So here we have the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates. Here. And the screen should be changing any moment. I've clicked. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here is our friend John Milton. He's got great hair, you can see. Lived from 1608 to 1674. And just out of curiosity, have either of you read Milton before? Anything by him?
No.
Nope.
I tried Paradise Lost on a book on tape, and it didn't work out too well.
Oh, that's right. You told me about that. That's right. Yeah, that's not maybe the best choice for a book on tape because it's so complex.
Yes.
Yeah. When I drove across the country this summer when we moved from Massachusetts, I listened to Robinson Crusoe, and that was a really good book on tape. I have to say, it was really exciting. Anyway, but okay. Well, there's a picture of Milton. I always think it's nice to just sort of have a little image of what the person looks like. And here is Milton as a younger man, actually, about 1629. And so, as you can see, I have here on the left-hand side a few things that might help give you some context before we start our 4R discussion today. And, I'm excited for that. But I think it's interesting that the first 4 here, they all have the word pro in front of them. I just sort of noticed that. Anyway, so yeah, he was Protestant. Now, I say Protestant purposefully because he was a few different things at different times. He sort of switched back and forth depending on how his conscience led him over the course of his life. And actually, at the very end of his life, he stopped going to any church because he just didn't feel that the truth was fully there, and he just sort of was frustrated with not having the doctrine as he thought it should be, even though he was still devoutly religious. But so he was Protestant. He was also pro-Parliament. So if we remember our timeline of English history, basically we have this century-long struggle between the king and the Parliament. It was finally resolved at the end with the Glorious Revolution that said the Parliament would be sovereign to the king. But he was always pro-Parliament and against the king having absolute power. He was also pro-Cromwell. In fact, he would write to support Cromwell. And as a result of his allegiance to Cromwell, after Cromwell won the victory in the English Civil War and then headed the Commonwealth, Cromwell selected Milton to be the Secretary of Foreign Tongues, they called him, because of his abilities with language. And so he held that government position during the Cromwell years. As you can see, he was also a polemicist. He wrote numerous political tracts, and they were all in favor of the Parliament over the king and trying to justify the English Civil War and the Roundheads' cause against the cause of the Royalists who supported the king. Welcome, Mr. Anderson.
Welcome. Thank you.
Welcome. We're happy to have you. We've just jumped into our lesson. We're just doing a little bit of context about Milton before starting our 4Ring.
Great.
Okay. Also, as Wendy mentioned, Milton is perhaps most famous for Paradise Lost. It is this epic poem that many scholars would consider the single finest epic poem written in the English language, and many scholars would argue that Milton has had the greatest influence on the English language other than William Shakespeare. Paradise Lost is written in blank verse, an iambic pentameter, and it was very influential on many, many writers, including people like Wordsworth and Keats and Tennyson. Anyway, we could get into that, but that's more for English. Okay. As I said, he was a government official under Cromwell. The other thing that's very interesting about Milton is that he struggled with blindness for much of his life due to glaucoma that became increasingly worse as he got older. And from 1654 on, he was completely blind. And so all of his writings, including Paradise Lost, were dictated mostly to his daughters. And so try writing iambic pentameter with your eyes closed.
Wow.
Yeah, so really quite an amazing man. Welcome,
and to
Heidi.
Not be able to constantly review what you've written.
Right. Yeah, he must have just had well, what an amazing mind that God blessed him with, and then we can really see so many miracles sort of just coming from the pen of Milton. If you ever have a chance, I would highly encourage you to read Paradise Lost. It's really full of lots of amazing insights, especially for someone who didn't have the restored gospel. Okay, well, let's move on then. And so the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, you read the last paragraph, which really just sums up the whole purpose and the whole argument, the real meat of this polemical tract that Milton wrote. And so the first thing I'd like you to do as we start our 4Ring, well, I guess you've already started it because you've researched, but as we move through it now to the reasoning, I'd like you to reason what event do you think the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, here just abbreviated as TKM, what event do you think it attempts to justify? Can you reason that?
Charles the First being beheaded.
You got it. There we go. Okay, and why would you say that? You're totally right.
Because he basically said that was okay to kill evil kings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how did you know that it was Charles the First that he was talking about instead of, say, Charles the Second or James the Second?
The timeline.
The timeline, excellent. And there was a clue in the title, right? And what clue was that led you to Charles the First's beheading?
In the title.
What was that, Wendy?
In the title, Tenure of Kings. In that title?
Well, the title, the title up on actually this screen, which is also part of the primary source title. There's information given in that title line. It's actually not part of the title, but
the date that it was written, you mean?
The date, you got it.
Okay.
Simple things like that may seem elementary, but really they make all the difference when trying to connect the dots. Because there are many people who wrote the same thing about people like James II, but yet that was much later. And so good eye, Wendy, for reasoning out that 1649 led you to Charles I, and then the content of this tract led you to know that it was about the beheading. And so the justification of that. Okay, well, time for our next little reasoning here. Okay, look at this word tyrannocide. Tyrannocide. Can you reason the meaning of that word based on your prior knowledge?
Well, I can reason the meaning. I think T-Y-R, and of course the A-N reminds me of tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
T-Y-R I think has to do with power or ruler, and side, like insecticide or homicide, has to do with killing, so it's the killing of a tyrant.
Yeah, you got it. Excellent. Thank you for using that prior knowledge to get to this point, because Milton's Tenure of Kings and Magistrates is especially famous because it supports tyrannocide. just as Mr. Anderson said, it is exactly the killing of a tyrant. And so here we have this pro-Tyrannocide pamphlet, and then let's talk about it then. Okay, so if you go now into the text, hopefully you have that in front of you. Milton gives some definitions. What does Milton say? Can you reason what he says is a tyrant?
Maybe somebody who rules and doesn't regard the common good or law.
Yeah. Excellent, excellent. And are you taking that from the third line, Walter? The third line of the last paragraph?
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. If we could all take a peek there, right? Walter found this line that says, a tyrant, whether by wrong or by right, coming to the crown, and then, quote, this is from the third line, is he who, regarding neither law nor the common good, reigns only for himself and his faction. And that's the definition according to St. Basil, as Milton cites there. So what does that mean, if we continue our reasoning here? What does that mean, someone who doesn't regard law or the common good?
Okay, can I just make sure that, are we on page 1
of
the reading?
This is the reading, and the reading for today was the last paragraph of the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates that started on page 7 and then goes to page 8.
Oh. Okay.
Do you have that, Heidi?
I just did the wrong reading. I started at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure you'll be able to pick up a lot.
Okay, so is it at the bottom of page 7? Okay.
Yep.
Yes, I see
bottom
where
of
we
page
are.
7.
Tyrant, rather by wrong or right. Okay.
Yes, you got it. Okay, excellent. Okay, so
Is it really staticky to Can I just ask a question? Is it really staticky to everybody else?
I do hear static, and I'm not sure why. Mr. Anderson,
I hear it too.
Do you know why?
I don't know why, but I suppose that if we, most of us would keep our mute button on, except for when we talk, then it will reduce the static.
Okay.
So I recommend always staying on mute unless you're talking.
Okay.
That's the little green microphone by your name.
Oh, now it's gone.
Great.
The
Okay.
static.
Well, I just muted, and you said it went off when I muted. I'm going to mute myself again.
That's
Okay,
right.
now I'm on a telephone this time instead because I couldn't get my headphone to work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how to mute myself on a telephone.
Well, the telephones are less problematic than the headsets, and so when static comes on in our class, we should, all of those of us who are on headsets in particular, mute for a minute and then unmute. Maybe not even for a minute, but just generally as a good habit, it's best to mute when you're not talking if you're using a headset.
Okay, but I don't need to worry about it so much. I'm the only one home,
That's right.
so there
On the
won't be
telephone,
background noise.
on the telephone, you needn't worry about it so much.
All right. Well, whatever somebody did, it helped tremendously.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you for that suggestion, Mr. Anderson. We can hear clearly now. The static is gone. Okay. Well, great. So back to the question then. So what does it mean to neither regard law nor the common good? Can you reason what that means or what that looks like?
It means, in my opinion, it means you don't care what other people want. You only care what you want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, think of it. This is the age of absolute rule, meaning what I want absolutely, and I really don't care what you think, right? Especially if you're anybody other than the king. So thank you for
You're
that.
above the law.
Mm-hmm. Above the law, excellent. Or we have Louis XIV in France saying that he is the law, right? Basically, what I say is
Right.
law, so let it be written, so let it be done, right? Excellent. Excellent
Correct.
point.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the meaning of the word law. If you look it up in its roots, it means how things lie currently. They're the conventions, the ways we interact together. And so if you disregard how things currently lie, our conventions of interacting as a social people, then you're disregarding the current laws. And you're disregarding the common good, which may not be written currently as a law.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, because, I like to think of it here, if we have law in the middle, law acts as a buffer in two ways. It is a buffer against anarchy on the one hand, and then it is also a buffer against tyranny on the other. And so how do you think law is a buffer against both anarchy and tyranny?
Well, again, law is it's kind of the status quo, and there's it's our customs and traditions as a people that help us move slowly rather than quickly toward tyranny, absolute power of one ruler, or anarchy, no rule, or the absence of law.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. And so, I think it's very important to remember that not only do we have a tyrant who is not paying attention to law, okay, but we also have a tyrant who's not working for the common good. Now, what in your definition is the common good?
What helps everybody?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Walter. What helps everybody, right? Is it in the people's best interest? And so we have a tyrant who's above the law, disregarding it, and also not acting in the people's best interest. So, okay, that brings us to our next point of reasoning. Okay, if we reason from the Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, right, what should be done about a tyrant? I mean, what does Milton say?
He says that just as the Greeks and Romans did, that tyrants should be murdered.
Okay,
Whether it's
yeah.
Caesar or anyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Right? I mean, these are very, very strong words, right? I mean, and Heidi, I love how you pointed out that he did cite the Greeks and the Romans, right? And actually, can we go there if we just flip to page 8, where it has Greeks and Romans italicized? And Heidi, would you read that sentence there, or that passage that talks about what you just stated? You could start with the Greeks and the Romans if you'd like. Hello, Heidi? Hello? Does anyone else hear me?
I do. Do you want me to read it?
Sure, that would be great.
The Greeks and Romans, as their prime author's witness, held it not only lawful, but a glorious and heroic deed, rewarded publicly with statues and garlands, to kill an infamous tyrant at any time without trial.
Great,
You want me to
thank
stop
you.
there?
That would be excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, so there are a couple of things here that Milton is saying, right? Not only can you kill a tyrant, but what does he say? How far can you go?
You reward the killer.
Yeah, so you're rewarding the killer, and also, what don't you need to have in order to kill a tyrant?
A trial.
You don't even need a trial. I mean, this is kind of, if you think of it, this is really out there. Okay,
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, one of the things that critics of what Milton wrote said is that, think about the people who killed Charles I. what happened was basically there was what was known as this rump parliament that was created by Cromwell's forces. And this rump, R-U-M-P, this rump parliament was the parliament that was devoid or without royalists. So it was without the supporters of the king, and then they alone said, okay, we're going to depose, and then we're going to execute Charles I. Now, people had a problem with it because they said, wait a minute, first of all, we have this martial law that the army has imposed at this time, and now we have a parliament without some of its members sort of voting out this king and choosing to behead him. And so there was a big worry by the people that, well, wait a minute, I mean, yeah, if it comes from the people, we see how this might be the right thing to do, but where did the army, Cromwell's army, or the parliament, this rump parliament, get their authority to behead Charles I? And that leads us here right to our next question, because this is what Milton is addressing. And like I said, this was the point of his argument that most people were very critical of, and it was very interesting. So let's talk about this for a second. What would Milton say justified taking action against Charles I? Can you reason that from the paragraph that you read?
He felt that those who ignored the law throughout their reign didn't deserve the protection of that same law. Okay, wow, that's an excellent insight, and well said. Nice job, Wendy. What else do we say? What else can we reason here from this? Why would Milton say, yeah, sure, it was done by an army and it was done by the rump parliament, but you know what? It was legitimate. It was justified. Would it be because he felt that God would find it acceptable?
Yes, definitely. And where can you show me a phrase or read a phrase to us that that led you to reason what you just reasoned?
There can be slain no sacrifice to God more acceptable than an unjust and wicked king.
Okay. Yeah, so Milton is even invoking, right, God's will. He's saying, yeah, this is the will of God, right, that we did this. So thank you for pointing that out, Wendy. Okay, so far we have the will of God. We have the fact that he wasn't worthy of the law because he acted above the law the whole time, so he didn't deserve its protection. If we flip over to page 7 and we look at the bottom, the last couple lines, there are another couple things that I wanted to point out in terms of what Milton tried to use to justify the beheading of Charles I. Can you reason what they might be? If you read those last two lines on page 7.
He says it is a vulgar folly of men to desert their own reason, shutting their eyes to think they see best with other men's, and so I think that means that it's really bad when somebody deserts their own reason and shuts their eyes to think they see better than everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for that, Walter. I appreciate the insight. And, I really liked how you pointed out in what you said a word, reason. I think it is very interesting that Milton is saying, listen, we have faculties, God-given faculties of intellect and ability to reason, just what you're doing right now, reasoning, and you're doing such a great job, by the way, reasoning all these principles out of Milton. But he talks about reason, right? And it is interesting to think that he's saying, you know what, sometimes, right, the people can just feel it. You just know it's wrong, right, because you can think through it and reason it, and you realize that logically, okay, he's not doing what we think he should be doing. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Is there another principle that you see that Milton names in those two lines?
I'm still looking at the wrong page number, so can you tell me which two lines you're referring to?
Okay, sure. So so basically we have the paragraph that starts, "We may from hence with more ease." Do you see that
Right.
paragraph? Okay. And
Yes.
then if you go down, if that's the first line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Well, even
9.
my lines are different than your lines, so I just
Oh,
need to
okay,
start
okay.
with.
Let's look. Do you see where he says need go further instead of further? FURDER, to be guided then by the very principles of nature in him, but because it is the
Okay.
vulgar folly. Do you see that?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So in there, is there anything else that Milton uses to justify Tyrannocide?
The principles of nature within man.
Okay. The principles of nature. What do you think those are? What are the principles of nature?
Just
Common sense? I don't know.
Okay, common sense. Okay, common sense. Great. Yeah, common sense. Okay.
a sense of what's fair and what's just and what's unjust.
Mm-hmm. What's fair, what's just, what's unjust, right? So to me, if I understand you right, it sounds like you're saying, there are certain things that we just sort of know, right? That are these sort of natural, almost you could say eternal laws. Some things are just, some things are unjust. And they're with us. It's interesting as we talk about some of the other men in this time period who were writing tracts like this and who were writing about government and political philosophy. They oftentimes do cite principles of nature or nature with a capital N. And it's interesting because nature to them represents the ideal. That in a perfect world there are absolutes that everyone would understand if they were able to see purely. And he's saying that one of them is that, we know, and I liked how Heidi said common sense, right? We know through common sense, right, that some things are wrong, and this is one of them. Okay, so far we have principles of nature, we have reason, we have God, okay, and then also, Heidi, what did you, when you mentioned the fact that they could kill them, and that it was a glorious thing to murder a tyrant, right? Who did Milton cite again?
I don't think it was me that said that, but
Oh, that wasn't Heidi? Was that
I
Wendy?
don't think so.
I was talking about
Probably.
Julius Caesar.
Oh, that was Wendy. I'm sorry. I still mixed up the voices. Okay, that's right. So what two civilizations did Milton cite?
The Greeks and the Romans.
Okay, excellent, right? So he's even citing the precedent of these two glorious civilizations upon which Western civilization built so many of its political and philosophical and scientific structures, the Greeks and the Romans. So really, he's running the gamut all the way from sort of natural law on one side to Greeks and Romans on the other, to reason, to even God. And so he's saying, sure, Cromwell's army, the Rump Parliament, they had enough justification, they had enough legitimacy in these four things to take out Charles I. Now, this is really interesting stuff. So what I want to do now that we've done such a great job reasoning, I want to relate. If we go to the American Revolution, because that will be such a huge part of our course and history, especially as we look at God's hand giving more agency or allowing more opportunities for agency, inspiring more people to have more agency in the history of the world. How do Milton's arguments relate to the American Revolution?
Well, you can hear it in the Declaration of Independence. Of course, the line is escaping my brain right now, but the whole point about how we have God-given rights, this idea of nature's law, and that anyone who would take away those rights, that we have a right to abolish or alter that government.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't go so far as to talk about tyrannocide, but they did say that we had the right to alter or abolish it.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I really like what you brought up, Wendy, because even though they didn't talk about tyrannocide, meaning literally the killing of George III in that case, right? What is 2/3 at least of the Declaration about?
Reasons.
Reasons for
Justifications, all the abuses that it suffered under George III's hand.
Excellent. Excellent. Under George III's hand, that's the key, because as we will talk about as we continue our study and as we look at the American Revolution, you know, the colonists in America didn't really have much of a problem cutting their ties to Parliament. They're like, hey, we're not being represented. Okay, you can't tax us without representing us. You don't have legitimacy because we, the people who are sovereign, aren't giving you our legitimacy, so forget it. We really don't care that much about you. And that was pretty easy. But the interesting thing is they had a really tough time, and they struggled and struggled and struggled until the final moments to cut their ties to the king. Which, I mean, to us, at least to me, I sort of scratch my head. I'm like, well, I don't know allegiance to a man, right? You know, but at the same time, they struggled, and honestly, it was the final thing to go. And it was not until Thomas Paine's Common Sense when he really just said, listen, the king is illegitimate, and we need to cut the ties to him. That's when the people, all the way until 1776, that's when the people were able to say, you know what, you're right. And they were able to cut those ties. And it's so interesting that the Declaration then figuratively, quote-unquote, kills the king, right? Just like Milton and his generation literally killed Charles I. So it is very interesting to look at that parallel between becoming a free people through unshackling yourself from a king. Any other relating about either American Revolution or kings in that way?
Well, I just was reading this weekend because my girls are going to New York, and I wanted them to visit some historical sites. And when George Washington read the Declaration of Independence from City Hall in New York in August of 1776, the first thing they did was run over to the statue of George III on Bowling Green and tear it down and melted the lead into bullets. So it almost is tyrannicide, I guess.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that excellent example. Okay, well, let's move here. So how do Milton's arguments relate to the origin of government and to sovereignty in government? Now, this one I think takes a little thought, but it's really fascinating if we can relate what we've read to these things. So, origin of government meaning... Go ahead.
I think that in relation to the origin of government, he is saying it resides in the people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You got it.
And then he's talking about, and nature's God, too, and that it resides from the laws of nature.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That is, you hit the nail right on the head. It's interesting that, that more than any other single issue in this century of British history, that is what the people are fighting about. It's, okay, where does government really come from? Is it just from some ruler who says, hey, I'm going to rule absolutely, and I'm ruling by the divine right of kings, right? Or does it come from somewhere else? Now, so what about if we look at that word sovereignty? It's kind of a big word, lots of vowels. Okay, but how does Milton's arguments relate to the sovereignty in government?
That they didn't need permission to do this. They were independent, and they had the right to do it on their own without anyone's go-ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Walter, do you have any thoughts as well to add?
Not really.
Okay, Mr. Anderson?
Well, I don't have thoughts to add right now. I just tuned in again. I've been off on an errand for a second. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay, no, that's all right. But this is fascinating. Basically, what both Heidi and Wendy mentioned will be what we're going to be reading about for our next reading. Milton he fits right in with this popular stream of political philosophy that's going around following the English Civil War and then all the way through the Glorious Revolution, which is, as both of you stated so well in your relating, that the people are sovereign, meaning the ultimate power resides in the people because the origin of government also resides in the people. That they created it, it's their invention. These are what the philosophers would say, right? And that because they created it, they can change it when it doesn't suit the purposes for which they created it. And so they ultimately have that power. They don't need to ask permission, as was said, and they can change their own creation. Excellent. And as we read Sidney, as we read Harrington, as we read Locke especially, we will be able to see these arguments articulated even more eloquently. Milton is just sort of hinting at some things here, and then we'll see their further expansion with Sidney and Locke especially. Okay, so here's a big question then. How do Milton's arguments, and do we hear the static again?
Yeah.
Is there a button we can push?
Yep, there we go.
That's better.
Okay. Great. I don't know. I guess we build up, and then we have to wash it down again. Okay. So here's the big question, right? How do Milton's arguments relate to you today?
Well, I'm just finding relate all over the place with what's going on in our government today.
And how do you see that, Heidi?
Oh, when the leaders are not looking at what's best for the common good, but what's just best for themselves, but actually trying to frame it in a way that's saying it is good for everybody.
And so how do those thoughts then relate right to Milton, would you say, in terms of action steps?
That the people should take charge.
Okay, right. In some way, and just so you know, I'm not here advocating Tyrannocide. But I think if we really think deeply about this, there does come a point where we say, okay, what is my responsibility with this knowledge, right? Does it change the way I think about anything? Should I act differently because of it? What else do we think? So thank you so much, Heidi, for bringing that. To you, you really feel strongly. Go ahead.
Well, I just can't help but this first sentence where it says, "We may from hence with more ease and force of argument determine what a tyrant is and what the people may do against him." I mean, that's pretty powerful, in my opinion. That we don't have to just sit back and be acted upon. I mean, we even talked about that today in Mr. Heyman's class. Are we to be acted upon? It says in 2nd Nephi, or are we to act? And I think most of the time, and the reason why we are where we're at today is because we let ourselves be acted upon.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful relating. What other thoughts do we have about how Milton's arguments relate to us right now, today?
Well, I have some problems with what he says.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Because even though a tyrant ignores the law throughout his reign, I still think he deserves the benefit of getting a trial before we murder him. And I'm wondering how this was accepted, how Milton's thoughts were accepted in those days. Because I have a problem with it. It's that whole line of thinking that the end justifies the means. And I think as horrified as I am with what's happening in politics today in America, I'm equally wary of using their same tactics, because the government right now is taking away liberty, saying, well, the end justifies the means. Healthier people, or more protected or safe people, safety from terrorism, all these, better health care, all these great goals justify the means that we're going to take to get there. And so, give us your liberties, and we'll take care of the of the terrorists will take care of the health care problems, etc. That's their whole line of thinking, that the end justifies the means. And here I see Milton using it, that we can murder tyrants, the end justifies the means. I have a problem with that. And the only time I can ever, obviously I can think of the time when God told Nephi to murder Laban, and there, he basically said the end justified the means. But there was a clear dictate from God in that circumstance, and I would be really hesitant to, I don't know. What does anyone else think?
Yeah, no, I think I specifically brought this up just because there's so many sides to it. So thank you so much, both of you. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think we have to be really careful when we. This is definitely trying to rile up the people and saying, yeah, just murder him. And I think you have to be really careful today to not let that by any means be your first, second, third, fourth recourse. There are so many other steps to take, and that's what I don't agree with him just, I agree with Wendy, I don't agree with him just saying just kill the guy off. But I do agree with him in saying the power lies within the people to make and affect change.
Yeah, I really like the way you said that, Heidi, because that was one of the things that, among many principles, that I would hope that we could really relate to ourselves today. That, yeah, of course, like I said, I would never, advocate this isn't about killing somebody, but I'm saying I think the principle that we can reason out from this is, as you said, power does lie in the people, and we do have a responsibility to act according to what we think is best in terms of our vision of good government. I think it's so interesting that if we look at the American Heritage, the handbook that the parents get, it's that we believe not in partisan political activity, but in patriotic activity. So we're not here to say that one party or thought is right, one's wrong, that sort of a thing. But yet we do believe, and the same thing with the church. We talk about basically you vote for who you think is right. It's not about one party or that sort of thing. It's your vision of good government, and the church won't tell you who to vote for. And so I think it's very interesting that we do grapple with these issues because we do have a responsibility to lend our consent to the government, right? To either say we consent to it, or we don't consent to it, or somewhere in the middle. But yeah, I love how both of you have articulated that. Number one, we need to be active, and if government isn't doing what we individually think it should, we do have that duty to stand up and try to do what we think is best. On the other hand, I love how you brought out that point that, yeah, we're talking about taking a man's life here, and we don't do that lightly. And I love what Wendy said. It's like, you need a dictate from God. This isn't just something that you just wake up and do just because you're a little bit peeved with some policy. So, I really love how you both were able to relate that. What about Walter and then Mr. Anderson? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think a lot of it's already been said. Can't think of too much else that could be said.
Here's a question for you then, Walter, specifically in terms of relating. Can you think of an article of faith that has something to do with what we're talking about?
Yeah, it's the 6th or the 7th or one of those, and it says that we believe in following the dictates of kings, magistrates, rulers, and other stuff. I can't remember the whole thing.
Yeah, no, that definitely is the one that I'm thinking of. And is there anybody who can quote it? I could read it to us, but is there anybody who remembers it? Anybody who wants to venture?
Sure, I can give it.
We claim the privilege of worship. No, that's the wrong one.
Let's look at, this is number 12 that I'm talking about.
We believe in being
subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates, in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law.
Okay. Thank you. Nice job. I know there were several of you who were able to do that. Thank you for that. So how, I mean, as we think about, okay, what happens? What do we do when there's a government that's not doing what we think it should? How do we take action, right? If we think about those two things, and then we relate them to this scripture here, right, that we do believe in being subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates, obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law. And so how do those relate to each other?
Well, I think they relate to each other insofar as we need to be, again, active in electing officials that are going to be to represent us, to represent our views. As you've been talking throughout this entire presentation, I've been thinking about the parallels to King George in the Declaration of Independence, that he was, of course, a tyrant, labeled a tyrant, even in the Declaration of Independence, and his train of abuses and usurpations were there listed, not to justify his death, but to justify his removal from power. And as conscientious citizens, if we study issues, read websites, listen to debates, and talk with our representative elected officials, then we'll be able to take them out of power when appropriate, remove them from their place, do as it says in D&C 10799, that when they are not fulfilling the calling, they're removed from it, and put into power those people who will be righteous and represent us appropriately.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. Anderson, I really love how you were able to connect both that duty we have to act with the commandment that we have to be law-abiding citizens. It is interesting to connect those. And in most cases, right, the great majority, we realize that there are ways, like Heidi, I think, was saying, what she was saying, it's not the first or the second or the third or the fourth choice, right, there are ways that we can work, right, for a redress of wrongs through the proper channels of law and the institutions that we have set up, right, to have our voices heard, so that we can act but yet still be law-abiding citizens. And so, I do appreciate that, and I wanted to make sure that we did connect this with that scripture, because that is something that we do believe in as Latter-day Saints. But yet at the same time, of course, if government's not working for us and what we think is best, then we do need to act. We also have that duty. So thank you so much for that wonderful relating. I was truly impressed. Just to get back to I think it was Wendy's question about how was this received. Was that you, Wendy? Was that your question, Wendy?
She might be muted.
Sorry,
yeah,
I was on
question.
mute.
Oh, okay,
Sorry.
sorry.
I forgot I was on mute. Yeah. Did people generally, when Charles was beheaded, were people okay with that? And also, I just wonder how many times throughout history has this really ever improved the situation?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. So I can speak specifically today about that question of how was it received. It was interesting because Milton was writing this, and there was a very large part of the population that said, wow, okay, listen, Charles was a bad guy, and sure, he dissolved Parliament, and, he came into the House of Parliament with his army to try to remove the Puritan leaders in 1641 after the Grand Remonstrance, and sure, he did all these things that really were just, inexcusable, and he should be removed. But do we really need to kill him? There were many, many people who felt that it was just not needful to kill him. They felt that was the extreme viewpoint, and many people, like I was sort of talking about before, did question the authority of Cromwell's army to force the royalists out of Parliament, those supporters of the king, and then with a royalist-less Parliament, this rump Parliament, to vote for the deposition and then the execution of Charles I. And so there were many people who said, boy, okay, maybe if we had voted as a people, maybe if the issue had been put to us, yeah, maybe then it would have been justified. And if the voice of the people said we should do it, okay, maybe I would be okay with that. But most people said that because they didn't do it, they were very, very worried that Cromwell's regime was heading down a course that would turn it into another regime of Charles I, just a different iteration. And as we could see down the road, right, what did Cromwell do? Well, he dissolved Parliament, just like Charles I did. He created a protectorate, which is just another way of saying I'll be a monarch without being called a monarch because I'm not hereditary and I'm not going to be a divine right of kings kind of person, but I'm going to rule with power in me, right? This sort of absolute rule without regard for the people and their popularly elected representatives. And so, there were many people who were afraid that this was a harbinger of bad things to come, and those people were right in terms of what happened with Cromwell under the Commonwealth and Protectorate. Unfortunately, our time is up for today. I am just so excited about the reasoning and especially the relating that we were able to do today. I'm grateful that you were able to really just take so much information from just this paragraph, really, in Milton. Really, it was fantastic. And so I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. And then let me just once again go to, there we go. Let's see here. I will go to the announcements just to point out that if we look here, let's get my little highlighter. There we go. Okay, so today we've discussed Milton, okay? And then here's your homework, right? That will be due for Wednesday. It will be to read Harrington, James Harrington, The Commonwealth of Oceania. Really another fascinating text. And I can say, though, Harrington is not known for being a stylist. His writing is actually disjointed and confusing in parts. So it's not you if you don't think he's very clear. It's probably him. Anyway, but the first 4 paragraphs on page 8, okay, and then be prepared to discuss your reasoning and relating of answers to the following questions. Number 1, what would Harrington say if the determining element of, what would Harrington say is the determining element of power in a state? 2, what does Harrington say about property? 3, what is the relationship between property and freedom? And 4, what does Harrington say about the differences between absolute monarchy, mixed monarchy, and commonwealth? Okay, well, I look forward then to another enlivening, or I should say another exciting discussion with you. And so I'll see everybody then on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, take care.
Goodbye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.